Trench Crusade. It is the new hotness sweeping YouTube right now, and for those who don't know anything about it, let me explain it like this. Trench Crusade is a grimdark alternate reality. Imagine if the Great Crusades played out as they did, but whenever they got to Jerusalem, they went full heretic. Due to their meddling with chaotic artifacts, Jerusalem literally exploded into a demonic portal, and now the legions of hell are pouring out of it. Even though God himself tried to contain the invasion with an iron wall that stretches thousands of kilometers, it's still not enough, and the world is breaking under the demonic invasion. It's a very cool alternate history setting with an official timeline with entries that are mysterious and enthralling, with just enough there to set up some kind of intrigue. The entire setting is kind of like the demonic marriage of occultism and 20th century technology. Sentences like demons help humans invent submarines is just something that's totally normal within this setting. You don't even blink an eye at it. My favorite one is the one I literally cannot read aloud without laughing. And you see, I can't even keep a straight face. I'll just put it on screen right here. I can't read that. I can't read that out loud. Hey, editing John here, real quick. I meant to film a section talking about some music to get you in the mood for the setting. I really like The Great War by Sabaton, and Serenity also made Lionheart, both of which are great albums, but I admit, I was listening to Creed the entire time I was editing this video. Alright, back to it. I'm personally a very big fan of World War I settings, in particular Weird War I. There's an RPG system called Never Going Home that I've wanted to run a game for a few years now, but I just never got around to it. And one of my pipe dream video games on my wish list is essentially anime World War I. Something about the time period is fascinating to me. So when the wargaming scene is set ablaze with a new skirmish game designed by one of the guys who helped make Mordheim, you know I was on board. That being said, with so many interesting factions in Trench Crusade, I genuinely didn't know what to pick for my warband. From roaming pilgrim warbands to the Lost and the Damned, 30 different flavors of Europe, to Beelzebub's actual super mega death syphilis given zombie form. I struggled, to say the least. I struggled with super mega death syphilis. Call this number right here. You too can get help with your super mega death syphilis. Side effects may include dying. So I let my patrons decide with a poll, not only to appease them, but I was really stuck picking one of these factions because I loved all of them so much. So it was a little bit of a cop-out maneuver. Sorry. The first option I had my eye on were the heretic naval raiding parties. Demon-worshipping pirates that terrorize the ocean routes and seaside settlements. Think of that one guy from Captain Phillips, but now he hails Satan and his friend looks like this. The second option was also heretic legions, a variant called Trench Ghosts, souls of heretics that have been abandoned by hell and heaven, so they wander the battlefield lashing out at both sides. Think Legion of the Damned from 40k, but evil. Actually, that's just the Warp Ghosts. The third option was the Dirge of the Black Hegemon. This faction variant is a bunch of Nurgle zombies that have basically lost their demon prince in combat, so Nurgle has abandoned them. Now they wander the world as a funeral procession, just with more like orifices that ooze black slime, you know. And the last option, which is not actually heresy in any way, the Eire Rangers. Brave men and women of Ireland who are experts in hit-and-run skirmish tactics, because the aforementioned naval raiders won't just mind their own fackin' business. I put a poll on Patreon and waited a few days, and with 42% of the total vote, the Eire Rangers were the winners. With all of the Celtic and Irish content here on my channel, I am well aware that somebody will accuse me of being an Irish fanboy, and I will accept that. I have only done this to myself. It is totally fair. Anyway, let's take a quick look at some of Ireland's lore within the world of Trench Crusade before we build a list. In the world of Trench Crusade, Europe and Africa have conglomerated into the Principality of New Antioch. Old Antioch was blasted off the face of the earth by a mysterious hell nuke in 1545 that apparently nobody knows anything about, so that's why they had to get a new one. Ireland exists as a member of this principality, their main opposition being the naval raiding parties of the heretic legions. The raiding parties are apparently so effective that they even attempted to launch a full-scale invasion on the House of Manuscripts, which the fighting Irish repelled, successfully protecting some of the church's holiest texts. The island nation is also noted to have fought off the Black Grail, mightiest plague of the Lord of Flies Beelzebub, at some point in the past. According to the Trench Crusade timeline, Joan of Arc apparently drove out the Black Grail from mainland Europe in 1429, although it's unknown if Ireland was involved in driving out the Black Grail or not. Historically, the Irish potato famine did begin in 1845, which was a period of mass starvation and disease outbreaks, so maybe that could have been the hand of the Black Grail in this alternate timeline. It'd be kind of funny to try to work this out with another person, especially if you don't give them any context. Like, yeah man, the potato famine really hit Ireland hard back then. Lack of food, societal instability, the fucking zombie dogs and bloated fly guys, and the super freak cultists drinking the spicy zit juice. So, it's probably up to interpretation. The Irish have been honed into masters of skirmish combat due to conflicts with heretical pirates, the most deadly of their ranks known as the Fina. Historically, and by that I mean real-life history, the Fina were roaming bands of warriors and hunters who lived off the land, usually consisting of Irish nobility, but not necessarily exclusive to their ranks. A Fien, singular form of Fina, was usually a young man who had left the home, but didn't have the resources to settle down as a landowner, so basically just dudes being dudes out in the wilderness, just hanging out. While many of the Irish Rangers and the Fina fight to keep Ireland's shores safe, many quickly find employment in New Antioch thanks to their skills. In fact, the poet king of Ireland sometimes just doesn't pay the church's tithe, instead sending a bunch of rangers to New Antioch instead. The Ire Rangers and Fina are such a boon that the Duke of the Church says, "Yo, holy shit, screw the tithe, this is way better. Thanks, Ireland." The Fina of Trench Crusade are a funny bunch though. While clearly devotees to the church, they still retain some of their pagan beliefs. Many Ire Rangers wear trophies and redistribute heretic skulls into their own pockets, something that is explicitly noted to bother the church quite a bit, a rare pocket of humor in an otherwise grimdark rulebook. I just like to imagine that the clerics highly disapprove of ornamenting the Holy Cross with animal bones and skulls, but everyone is kinda just too scared to stop them from doing it. And as the last official Ireland lore blurb, it's noted that some Irish have a berserker gene hidden within their blood. By undergoing a chemical communion with the Metachrist, a sentence I never thought I would either say or understand, they become impervious to fatal blows and sensations of fear or pain, allowing them to bask in the glory of the blood orgy.
I've long awaited this blood orgy.
As of right now, the rules I have access to are the Trench Crusade playtest rules version 1.5, and before I do anything else, let me establish this. When making my Mordheim list, I made a few errors. No big deal, that was my first real list for a wargame, but it left me vulnerable to some errors. This time, I will officially be implementing the Skirmish Game Protection Edict of 2024, which states, I made this warband this way for a video, and if I made an error, well, it's way too late to change it now. We are all shit out of luck. And that document officially, legally protects me from all criticisms stemming from the updated rules, especially in the case of Trench Crusade, because the rules are still in development. They are ever evolving. So get off my back, rules lawyers. I am legally untouchable. That being said, I did fuck up the rules again. For those who haven't looked at Trench Crusade or haven't built a list in Trench Crusade, I'm saying that a lot. For those who haven't built a list in this game, it's very similar to Mordheim if you've done that before. You start off with a budget of 700 ducats and buy a limited amount of units and war gear to go alongside them. The Eire Rangers are a variant of the new Antioch lists with their own special rules and restrictions. I will be trying to use every variant rule that I can, mainly to keep the flavor of the Eire Rangers that I'm going for, and I will try to be accommodating for my rules fuck-ups whenever I get there. So first off, our warband needs a leader, and the standard leader for a new Antioch list is the Lieutenant. As one of the Eire Ranger special rules, the Lieutenant is eligible to be promoted into a Berserker, which grants him immunity to fear and a lot of extra durability on the battlefield. However, this comes at the cost of him not being able to wear armor, but that doesn't matter because armor is kind of expensive, so I wasn't going to buy armor for him anyways. I'm going to arm him with a trench shield, alternating between an auto shotgun or an axe for melee and ranged combat. Do note that some weapons come with a rule called shield combo, which allows them to be used alongside a shield, and there are some firearms that do have that. The Eire Rangers have a special rule to allow them to take an extra trench cleric, but for now, I want to take just one. After all, nothing is preventing me from taking a second cleric later into a campaign. The Eire Rangers get a rule for an instrument called a Carnyx. If you've never seen one of these, they're actually pretty cool. It's like a little horn with a horse's head on the end, and you blow into it. It's actually, let me just play the noise. As the premier warhorn of Celtic armies of old, the Trench Crusade Carnyx allows its user to cause fear. Additionally, unless stated, any unit that causes fear is immune to fear, so it's kind of a double dip bonus. As for his actual gear, I'm going to give him an axe and an auto pistol. He'll probably stay in pistol range most of the time, but just in case he gets charged, you know, he got the axe. And those are basically my special characters done, so we're going to move on to the regular soldiers. To start them off, I'm going to start with 2 yeomen. These are the basic soldier of Antioch lists, although they can be upgraded to trench moles to gain the infiltrator rule. The infiltrator rule is similar to Deep Strike from 40k, essentially allowing for a vanguard deployment, allowing for some early scores on objectives, or to fortify some positions early on. Yeomans come with bolt action rifles as a standard, which I'm not going to bother changing, but I am going to add bayonets for both of them, mainly because this is a World War I game, and it feels kind of weird to not have a bayonet on the end of my bolt action rifle, but it also does give them the option for a melee weapon. Trench Crusade has a rule called fire teams, and while normally new Antioch lists have 2 fire teams, the Eire Rangers get 1. To use a fire team, you essentially select 2 models and they take their turns at the same time. That could probably be more useful on other units, but for a little bit of buddy flavor, fire teaming these 2 guys could be kind of fun. I don't know, it's an option. And now to the meat of the list, the Fena Shock Troopers. New Antioch Shock Troopers are heavy weapon melee specialists with high mobility. As an added bonus of promoting Shock Troopers to the rank of Fena, Shock Troopers gain the Infiltrator tag, like the Trench Moles, and also Skirmisher. Skirmisher is a rule that the Fena and also the Berserker get that allows them to move D3 inches in any direction when they're charged, making them very squirrely. Given that the Shock Troopers also get extra range on their charge, it's going to make them very potent in close range combat. I'm taking 3 Fena Shock Troopers with different loadouts, although this is where I made my rules mistake. The Eire Rangers are specifically described as light infantry, and as such, only 1 unit is allowed to use heavy weaponry. Since the Shock Troopers have a rule that allows them to ignore the heavy tag for melee weaponry, in my mind I was like, oh cool, yeah, I'll just give them great swords and one of them had a great axe because they use the same rules. So I made the list with all of the Fina using great weapons. In my defense, this was the only major rule that was not on the same page, so I didn't flip to the second page to read it. But this is an easy fix rules-wise. I'm still going to be modeling them with their great weapons because I had already printed them out by the time I realized my mistake. But if you were to change these to just regular swords and regular axes, it'd be 100% totally fine. As for their ranged weapon, there's no problems here. 2 of them are taking semi-auto assault rifles, and 1 of them is taking a flamethrower, just to have a little bit of variance in the types of damage I can do. And finally is the mechanized heavy infantry. The Eire Rangers are limited to 1, no matter what, and this is the only unit qualified to carry said heavy weapon. Like I said, I already messed up the rules, oops. But for the loadout on this guy, I took a grenade launcher and an axe. With this list, the total expenditures came up to 698 ducats. Although the list is wrong since I missed 1 rule, were I to implement the regular weaponry instead of great weaponry on the Fina, the list would still be valid and I would have some excess money left over. But like I said, I didn't notice I messed up on the rule until after I printed everything out. And I just can't keep going back to fix things. Otherwise, I would just be redoing videos till the end of time. So I know, out of the Mordheim and the Trench Crusade videos, I'm 0 to 2 on rules. It's not looking good. Fuck up. God damn it. So the list is done, but we need to hammer out some lore for these guys. When I made my Warheim Warband, it was a little light on lore, and some people were hoping for, at least a little bit of something. So we're just going to take a very quick second to touch on, that little bit of something. The Eire Rangers in general can be described as not exactly approved by the Vatican. While they have a more outdoorsman aesthetic implied to them, I really want to have the visual aesthetic of like Wild Knights. Like the default Shock Trooper art is, I love it a lot, and that's what I wanted my list to look like. Even if it doesn't quite go as hard into the aesthetic as the Eire Rangers could probably comfortably go, my aesthetic is a little bit more towards a default new Antioch kind of look. And I realize that may be kind of upsetting to some people, but I just really, really like knights in armor. I love armor, just in general. So, keeping with the wild knight kind of theme, the marriage of the medieval knight and the wilderness man, I decided to embrace my inner space wolf and go with a wolf theme for a few reasons. 1, the Fina are described as elite warrior hunters, children of the wilderness, if you would. Number 2, they use guerrilla tactics in a loose formation, which is part of the lore reason for them losing a fire team, but that also leaves them a little bit more flexible in terms of their overall positioning and movement options. And the big one for number 3 is that wolves have a special relevance in Ireland. As they say in 40k, there are no wolves in Ireland. While very relevant in Irish mythology, in modern-day Ireland, wolves are extinct, noted to have been hunted out in the late 1780s. In real life, this has gradually left the deer population to run unchecked, and there's actually a sort of a movement to reintroduce wolves to Ireland, mainly to keep populations of deer and small game in check. So for my warband, I'm going to call them the Wolves of Eire. See, back in 1780, the wolves did not go extinct. Instead, they merely took shelter in the Sidhe. The fairy folk reforged their bodies to fight against demons, and their descendants re-emerged to drive out the heretical invaders. They preferred to travel using the cover of the tree lines where possible, and raid heretic naval outposts, usually striking in the dead of night.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Given that they live off of the land, they have no qualms with looting either heretics they've slain or allies who have fallen and were left behind. While they're mostly an independent group, they do loosely cooperate and coordinate with allies of New Antioch, who described them as unfearing of death entirely. You see, the Fina are blessed by God, for when they fall in battle, God allows their souls to run along the wind and retreat back to the She. There the fairies will mend their spirits until they re-emerge, ready to fight once again. Their faith makes them unrelenting, never knowing fear, and being quite blasé about the imminent threat of a painful death. Honestly, it's a very casual affair for them.
I thought you said I was going to die, Father.
So we're all going to die, Patrick.
Now that list and lore are done, we can source some models. The Eire Rangers are light infantry, but as I said, I'm completely enamored by the Shock Trooper art, so we're going to go with a more standard Antioch vibe. Plus, this kind of fits into the lore of my warband, who have no qualms with looting their dead allies, as, they're not going to be using it anymore. To start with, I combed my mini factory for hours, trying to find something that matched the aesthetic of what I wanted versus, what I could work with. That's when I stumbled into the
Soldaten
range from Aramir Orleans. This is actually pretty comprehensive. It's got like a unit builder, fem unit builder, armored unit builder, extra arm poses and bits, and even some vehicles to go along with it. Honestly, pretty good looking Imperial Guard, and if I ever get around to doing Feudal Guard like I kind of want to do in a million years from now, I'm going to have to keep this in mind. I went with both the regular and the Grenadiers set. I also got the Crusader's arms set for the bolt action rifles that were included, and the weapon bits set. For my cleric, I used a single mini that I stumbled into, the Fanatic Priest from Onmioji Miniatures. For the Mecha Infantry, I stumbled into the Heavy Infantry kit from Sir Nicholas Miniatures, which was like 95% of what I wanted. It's pretty obvious that they made this for Trench Crusade, for this unit, and I'm very thankful because it looks really good. The total of all these STL sets lined up to about $60, but I bought all this during the Black Friday sale, so most of this was like half off.
But shit, it was
$30. I did also end up using some parts for some kits I already owned, namely the Reptilian Overlords Master Regiment template that I used in my Imperial Guard series. I also took some bits from the Modular Knights pack from Victis Miniatures. Looking at it, I really dipped into a lot of kits for this project, but I'm going to blame it on the Black Friday deals. It went to my brain. Links to all of these will be in the description. Anytime I use an STL in any one of my videos, I always try to leave a link to it in the description. This is no different. Now that we're actually building minis, I cleaned and assembled parts just like any other resin print. I used thick gel superglue to attach all the parts together, starting with the Heavy Infantry, mainly because that was the mini I was just most excited to get built first. I used parts to replicate the pose similar to the promotional picture. I glued on a helm that looked like a kettle helm and mounted the axe on the front. This and all the other axes used on the army will be attached to the hip, and later on I'll be modeling on a little belt loop for easy stowage and access, much like a little metal loop for a hammer. I also added styrene wedges under the feet of all the minis today. I really hate it when minis look like they're sinking into their basing material, and while it would be really appropriate for mud, I'm still doing it here. Using a little bit of green stuff, I sculpted on that simple little rectangle for the belt loop I was just talking about. This was fairly easy. It's just a rectangle, really. I guess I could have made it a little thinner, but whatever. It's just a belt loop. Who cares? It occurred to me that this mini in particular needs storage for its grenades, so I was going to model on a satchel. I glued a lump of green stuff to the back of the model's left flank. I cut the putty into a rectangle and then let it cure. Using some strips of flattened green stuff, I attached 2 strips to the front, then added some more loops on top of that. With another flap sculpted on top of it all, we ended up with a pretty good looking satchel, if I do say so myself. Just a little something to store the grenades with. Otherwise, I would look at this model and just think, where in the hell does he keep all of his grenades, you know? To add a little bit of pagan disrespect to this model, I mounted a heretical skull to the front of the belt before going around the armor and mounting on some little bits of wolf fur. I wanted small fur, like fine fur, but still get a little bit of floof to it. I like when fur has volume to it. I used the tip of my X-Acto to stab into the putty and pull out, making very fine locks of hair. When it's all painted, it all looks like small strands of hair, especially if you kind of poke it in, not just down, but kind of swish it to the left and right a little bit to add a little bit of randomness to the pattern. But like I said, it still has that volume to fill out the body of the fur that I like. I use the same technique to add a wolf pelt collar to the Berserker and the Fina as well, as a sign of veterancy and to really, embody that wolf spirit. The yeomen, or trench moles really, were built straight as I had modeled them. The basic Soldaten bodies with bolt action rifles. I added a backpack from the Master Regiment template, and I used the helmet option of the open salle with gas masks for all units. The salle is my favorite medieval headwear, and the gas mask just really gives it that World War I vibe, so having them both combined, I really couldn't resist, Adding a backpack not only makes the back of the model more interesting, but it just makes mechanical sense, like why would a soldier not have a pack of some kind? The only extra bit I modeled onto the model was a little decorative military cord that I added under the left arm. While they are basic soldiers, I still wanted them to have at least a little bit of veterancy to differentiate them from the standard Antioch soldiers. Like, they're still a basic unit in my warband, but they're still one of the, Irish Rangers. They're still, like, dangerous individuals compared to the rank and file. For the Fina, I used Grenadier bodies, probably more appropriate for the engineer units that New Antioch has access to, but as I said before, I wanted a more knightly appearance, so you gotta get the armor, This also helps differentiate them from a distance from the trench moles, as when the paint goes on, they'll be a lot more silver as opposed to the trench moles, who will have more of their uniform fabric showing. After assembling the bodies, I found it easiest to model the wolf pelts on the Fina, then squish the head into it. Not only did this prevent me from having to reach around the helmet, but it also worked just fine for adhering the heads. Didn't even need glue or anything, just stuck them in. After curing all of these parts, a lot of the weapons were bent for some reason, and I really don't know why. They all sat flat in my little curing box. Contrary to popular belief, you don't actually bend bullets with bent rifles, so I gotta get some hot water and straighten these out. I used some tweezers to better submerge the parts, which also has the added benefit of not boiling my fucking fingers. After about 30 seconds in the water, I hold it straight for another 30 seconds, and then I like to dip it in the room temp water to cool it back down. That should leave you with a straight resin piece, which I repeated for the other rifles and the greatswords. These are all weapons that are going to be stowed on the side of their packs, so what I did is just squish a little bit more green stuff in there, add some extra fur, and then just stuck the weapon right to it. Normally I'd be a little bit more fussed about how the weapon is actually staying there and maybe model on some straps, but I'm just not going to bother with it this time. The flamethrower Fina used flamethrower arms from the Master Regiment template, which I am really getting my money's worth for. However, for this trooper, the greatsword did not fit flushly onto the pack, so I had to clip the side of the bedroll to fit it. I don't think the average viewer would notice until it's pointed out, so I think it's a little bit of a stealthy cheat on my end. And with that last greatsword, all of my troops were finished, so I moved on to the cleric. The trench cleric needed a lot of work compared to everything else so far, so I began by removing the torch pole. I clipped about 1 millimeter away from the hand, then trimmed it down, trying to clip right next to the hand could cause the hand to crack or snap, so this was the safest option. Also, my fat fucking head was peeking into frame for some reason. With the torch pole removed, I drilled through the hand to be able to pin the Carnyx to later. Drilling into a small bit of resin like this is tricky, but as long as you go slow and clear your bit often, you should be able to make it through just fine. I like to also work slowly from both sides until they meet in the middle. With that setup, I really wanted to replicate the giant cross that you can see on the standard trench cleric art. There's probably a better choice of object for a more pagan-leaning cleric, but since the Warband can take 2 clerics, I like to think one could be modeled a little bit more standard churchy, and then the second cleric could be, decked out in like trophies and animal bits, Since there's 2 clerics, you can do both aesthetics. I grabbed some square styrene rods and glued 2 of them together to get a good width. I'm going to be replicating a wood texturing method from Night Shift, a veritable god of the armor modeling scene. I take a wire brush to the styrene with an occasional line carved in with a knife. Keep in mind that this can kick up a lot of dust, so either keep the piece wet or turn on a fan or put on a filter or something, whatever. Standard procedure for not getting little bits in your lungs. Do whatever. This will also pretty much destroy the surface that you do it on. As you can see here, I tore up the measuring lines on my cutting mat. This mat has seen a lot of abuse. I am forever in this thing's debt. When you're done raking the surface of the styrene, I use some extra thin cement to smooth out the texture and remove all these small leftover burrs. It's a little hard to see since it's white, but it'll come out later. Just trust me. I made 2 sets of these conjoined wooden boards, cutting halfway into both of them to overlap and make the final cross shape. I drove some paper clips into it to act as nails, and there you go, giant cross. With all of the cleric's individual components ready, I can go ahead and start attaching everything. The axe goes on the front of the belt, again, with a loop for easy access. The auto pistol will go on the side after removing the pre-sculpted keyring, but I kind of scratched my head while trying to make a holster for this pistol. I ended up going with a styrene sheet and sculpting a little belt loop for it. Although I did break off the barrel on accident, it did kind of help fit it to the model's height. The cross was mounted to the back with a wad of green stuff and wrapped with some green stuff rope to hide the connection. If this was a multi-piece model, I would have added a rope sash of sorts to show how the cross is hanging onto the model, but I didn't want to get all nitty-gritty with all the fine detail here, so it's just going to kind of float back there. Don't look at it too hard. Finally, the Carnyx was clipped in half and attached to the hand, removing a bit of shaft equal to the hand, which helped preserve the spacing of the rings on the Carnyx. Basically, so it just doesn't look suspiciously long, And with that, the cleric was complete. As I said before, with 2 clerics, one being more church, one being more pagan, I think it kind of works. This is obviously my more churchy one, but I really like how it came out. So we're going to move on to the Berserker. So rules as written, Berserkers cannot wear armor. Now that works out because I didn't buy any armor for anybody in my warband. However, aesthetically, people are wearing armor. So aesthetically, my Berserker is also going to be wearing armor. This particular commandery pose has a stick grenade on the back that interferes with attaching the pack. So while I trim that off and attach the backpack, let's talk about shotguns. I essentially had 2 choices of shotguns that I already owned, and I didn't really want to go buy another shotgun bit. One was from the Soldaten kit, and the other from the Master Regiment template. I took my concern to the infamous Nathan, and if you've been here a while, you know exactly the Nathan, since he is a lot more studied on guns than I am, I said to him, "Hey man, which one of these looks more like a shotgun?" And he gave me this wall of text basically saying the second one, but it doesn't really matter. So I went with the drum-fed one, basically because it looked cooler. Problem with either option though is that the bit is meant to be two-handed, and since I'm using the shield combo, I need it to be one-handed. My solution to this was removing the left arm and sanding off the pre-molded hand, then sawing the right arm off under the pauldron to rotate it and get a more heroic weapon holding pose. Got a little bit of Doom Guy energy there. And now for the shield, which was taken from the Modular Knight set. I knocked around a few ideas on what to sculpt on the front of it. Some of it felt too ornate, like the oak tree design, which I was totally on board for, but since I wanted to sculpt it, it would have just taken too long. The Eire Rangers rules says the patron for this warband is automatically St. Patrick, but that didn't really feel right for my little outlaws. Therefore, the shamrock with the inlaid cross, while cool, didn't really seem right. I decided based on time and effort and aesthetic to keep it simple with a styrene cross. However, I did want to ornament it a little bit with some wolf claws. I rolled out a very thin green stuffed log, almost as thin as I could handle. With two logs overlapped on one end, I can then twist them together. It's very fiddly, but you can make some semi-decent rope this way. The thinner the logs, the better, but man, it gets almost maddening at some point. So just do as best as you can. That's all I can ask of you. That's all anybody can ask of anyone. Just do your best. I sculpted some little claws on a flat surface, which I can then remove, then glue to the model. Then with a small tube joining the claw to the rope, the shield was complete. I also modeled an extra large pelt for him. It was meant to signify him as a leader, but honestly, a regular pelt probably would have looked better in retrospect. The shield itself is enough of a visual indicator to make him stand out. He didn't need the pelt. Well, he needed the pelt, just not the big one. You know what I mean. And before we move on to painting, if you're enjoying the video and the endless torrent of boring minutia, please consider liking or sharing the vid, or maybe even subscribing or becoming a patron. If not, that's totally fine. As long as you've been entertained today, that's good enough for me. For the Warband's fabric bits, I wanted an olive green, and here's something funny I learned about acrylic paints. My first instinct was to mix green and black, but get this, mix yellow and black instead. If you're like me, you're gonna look at this and be like, what the fuck, why would I do that? But look at this dude, a perfect olive green. I would have never thought to mix yellow and black to get this paint, but I'm looking at the proof and it is so cool. I can't unsee it either. For the highlights, I mixed light tan into that olive green, which was dry brushed across the warband. I then painted the black and brown areas. Black parts like the boots, gloves, and gas masks all got black with a neutral gray dry brush, and brown parts like the wood on rifles got dark brown, then a dry brush of tan. With those parts done, that left me free to paint in all of the metallic areas with a gunmetal silver, since most of the metal was easily accessible after painting the sections underneath. The cleric was painted in a light tan, with a gold applied to his crucifixes, with that gold also being painted on any of the other crosses on other minis, such as the Berserker's shield or the heavy infantry's pauldron plates. With that, I was left with a base-coated warband with some partial highlighting and something I don't often do anymore, a gloss varnish, which got them ready for a new phase in my hobby career, oil washes. I have never done an oil wash, but since this is Trench Crusade, I figured this was like the perfect time to try to learn. For this, I got everything I needed from Hobby Lobby, my favorite American-based Iraqi artifact thieves, since I was in town anyways and this was all like 40% off. Big savings here in the lab, I'm loving it. I got some dedicated palettes, a brown and black oil paint, and some mineral spirits for about 14 bucks. The brushes were already spares I already had, although I trimmed the ends to fit in the box. So everything I need for oil washing is in one container and ready to go. I mixed a dollop of brown and black with some mineral spirits, and I laid it on heavy. I'm going full grimdark on this warband, and I want this shit to be grimy, nasty, wretched even. With everything washed, I left it to sit for an hour, then came back in with a brush with some fresh mineral spirits loaded on it, and started removing the wash. As I said, I gloss varnished these models since I didn't want to rub off the acrylic underneath. The mineral spirits themselves don't actually weaken the acrylic paint, but the abrasion from a sponge or a paintbrush, will obviously, damage the paint. I tried to keep my brush strokes downward in general, and I also did try a makeup sponge I bought about 4 years ago for this very purpose. Between the two, I decided I liked the control of the brush a little more, since the sponge was removing a bit too much for my tastes. I waited about a day for the oil wash to cure to the touch, and it was still a little bit fragile, but I wanted to do one last step, which was edge highlighting all the silver parts with my brightest silver paint. I did mix it up with some sponging in there, some with a brush, but it really was the little extra garnish the silver parts needed, both for the color pop and for the weathering. I'm really glad I did this step. With the oil wash completed, the models themselves are done, so I'm going to move to the basing. The backbone of my Trench Crusade basing is going to be this Liquitex coarse texture medium. I stumbled into it at Hobby Lobby, and I'm really glad I did, because this stuff is really nice. I added it to a cup, adding in a small scoop of some sand and some clay cat litter rocks for some granular variation, with a little bit of black paint. I carefully added a dollop of it to each base with a spatula, and then used a toothpick to move it into all the nooks and kind of level it out as well. I forgot to film it, but I did make some barbed wire using this video tutorial and added it to my bases. Since this is raw metal, I mixed matte varnish and gunmetal to try to make some kind of ghetto primer, and it actually did kind of work. This got a dusting of silver dry brushes when it dried. For the ground color, I mixed gray and brown for a sickly brown, with some green in it to brighten it up just a little bit to contrast it from the black recesses of the mud. The final step for the bases was a leopard spotting of black and brown washes, both thinned as to not obscure the original color too much. I'm painting from the pot here in the footage, but these are like half and half pots, like half of the original wash and then half glaze medium. And as much as I'd love to say that I painted some base rims to finish it off, these are actually bare plastic besides the gloss varnish. I kind of like the idea of bare base rims that don't lose paint as you handle them, but it's probably not super practical. I don't really know though. If you do bare rims and handle your minis a lot more than I do, which is never, let me know how that's worked out for you over time. I'm genuinely curious. And here are the completed units for the Wolves of Eire, starting with the trench moles. Also, do note that we've got a new Trench Crusade themed base topper. Very cool, if I do say so. This was a really fun project, despite me messing up the rules once again, and kind of disregarding the potential for the aesthetic of this faction. Like, I could have gone whole hog on the outdoorsman, wildman aesthetic, Like if someone says, that's cool, but you could have pushed it further. I get it, This was my first attempt at an oil wash, and I did learn quite a bit from the experience. I was initially kind of skeptical on the result, but I think adding the silver highlights on the end really sold me on it. I just really like color on my minis. I'm not a particularly grim dark enjoyer, but having just the little silver chipping over it kind of helped sell me on it. I do think for the majority of my videos though, I'm probably going to stick to acrylic washes just because it lets me work faster. Having to wait for these to cure was a pain in the ass, and even then it was only partially cured and I could still rub parts of the wash off if I wasn't really being careful. Now, let me go on record. Even though I fucked up the rules, even though I didn't push the aesthetic, I love my Fina. They are just so cool. Oh my god, these are some of my favorite models ever. These are peak. These are Kino. I don't use based a lot in my vocabulary, but these are based. They are exactly what I wanted. Even if they're more in line with the standard Antioch aesthetic, I don't care. I love my Fina. I especially enjoy the flamethrower one. It just has this extremely intimidating aura to it, and because of that, it became my favorite of the bunch. I don't know, man. This is sick. I also really love how my heavy infantry came out as well. The wash is just gorgeous on this mini. It's this perfect shade of dirty metal that is just elevated by the silver chipping. Ugh, I love this mini. I haven't looked at all of the rules yet, but if there is a new Antioch variant that lets me have even more heavy infantry, I'm doing it. My 2 leader units also came out really well, especially the cleric. The white robes really just lets that oil wash just pop. And the wash really brings out the grain on the cross. Now that I'm looking at the cleric though, I didn't really think about how he would actually play the Carnyx. Like, you gotta use your lungs, but he's got a gas mask on. Maybe he just kind of like takes the gas mask off to give a quick little doot, or maybe it's just like a Crozius and he just bonks people with it. Maybe he's Dr. Doom and he doots as he pleases. I don't know. I'd like to take a quick minute to thank all the new patrons we've had since the video on the Collar Cost Blood Crusade. Schemy Mango, Greg Kelly, Coco, Wrecking Ball, Jake Lewis, Abel Duviant, I hope I said that right, Dakota Sternweiss, Stephen Pawlowski, Mad Max 997, Travis Stringer, and last but not least, if you enjoyed the video, you can find me on Instagram, you can become a patron, or you can leave me a tip on Ko-fi. Like, favorite, subscribe, blah blah blah, I did a lot earlier. Overall, I had a ton of fun getting my hands and feet dirty with Trench Crusade here. There will definitely be more Trench Crusade in the future, as I'm still very interested in the other options from the poll, although I'm really not opposed to anything heretical or demonic, or like I said, if there is a variant of new Antioch that gives me more heavy infantry, you know, I love me some big dudes in armor. That's kind of my whole channel at this fucking point. Next time I will try to be more judicious about my adherence to the rules, mainly because I'm tired of looking like an idiot, but the possibility is never quite zero since, as I've said before, I am an actual amoeba. Unless something has gone horribly wrong, this should be my last video for the year of 2024, and I think we're ending the year pretty well. I think we put out a pretty good amount of content here, and I'm excited because 2025 it's going to be a big year. We grew a lot in 2024, and next year we're going to have more 40k, more other war games. I've got a huge list of games I want to touch on. I don't know exactly when this video is going to be going out, but I just wanted to say thank you everybody for being here this year. If this comes out before Christmas, then Merry Christmas. If this comes out after, Happy New Year. Either way, Happy Halloween. Keep an eye on my community tab for any kind of updates. And that's it. That's all I can think of. Thank you. Have a good one.